If you are preparing for a VBAC, I have put together a free guide to help you in your preparation. It's called Preparing for a VBAC, Your First Three Steps to an Empowered Birth Experience. This guide will walk you through the first three steps that you need to make on your VBAC preparation journey, and it'll make the whole process a lot easier and more straightforward for you. So if you want to grab that guide, go to thehannahgill.com/first steps. Again, that is thehannahgill.com/first steps. Hey there. I hope you're doing well today. It's been a crazy few weeks going on vacation and then getting back from vacation and trying to get back into a routine and a schedule. So my podcast releases have just been kind of all over the place. But today I want to talk about a question that I see every single day and get constantly for people. And is that, what questions do I need to ask my provider when I'm trying to find a provider for my VBAC, whether that be an OBGYN or a midwife? These are going to be questions you want to ask for interviews, and I truly, truly recommend interviewing multiple providers when deciding on one for your VBAC. It could be multiple OBGYNs, it could be OBGYNs and hospital midwives, it can be OBGYNs and home birth midwives. Whoever you are interviewing, especially in a hospital, start asking these questions. I'm your host, Hannah Gill, and this is Motherhood Flow. So I actually wrote a blog about this topic, but I wanted to turn it into a podcast format. Asking your provider questions about VBAC is so vital when you're looking for a provider to support you. Don't just go with your last provider or the provider that is highly recommended to you. Make sure you ask questions about your specific circumstances. This can help you understand your provider's true views on VBAC, not just, yes, I support it, or no, I don't. It can help you identify red flags early on in your pregnancy, just in case you need to switch providers. And then it can help you build trust and confidence with your provider throughout your entire pregnancy. And then it also encourages full explanations, especially when you ask open-ended questions that can't just be answered with a simple yes or no. It forces your provider to explain their reasoning and provide evidence versus just a yes or no answer. So let's dive into the 5 overarching questions that you can be asking your providers during your interviews. The first is, what is your experience with VBACs? So this helps you understand your provider's level of experience with supporting VBACs and can really give you insight into their comfort level and their expertise in the situation. So you can even ask questions like, can you tell me about the VBACs you have supported in the past year? Or how do you support VBAC patients differently than those planning a repeat C-section? So those are some open-ended questions you can also add on to what is your experience with VBACs. The second would be, what are the hospital's policies on VBAC, or what are your practice's policies on VBAC? Policies can significantly impact how your birth unfolds, but it's also important to understand that these policies, knowing them ahead of time, can help you be prepared to advocate if needed, because just because it's a policy doesn't mean it has to be followed, but you need to understand why the policy is in place and what you need to advocate for. Next is, what is your approach to interventions during TOLAC or a VBAC? So this can help you understand your provider's approach to potential interventions during the process, and that can help you determine if their philosophy aligns with your desire for a low intervention VBAC or the type of VBAC experience that you are wanting. So you can ask about specific interventions as well. For example, how do you typically handle a VBAC labor that is progressing slower than you would prefer? Or what are your thoughts on intermittent monitoring instead of continuous monitoring for VBAC? So asking those questions, overarching what their approach is to interventions, and also asking about specific interventions can be super, super helpful. The next is, what happens if there are complications? You can literally leave it open to that. VBAC, we know, is generally safe for most women, and it's important to discuss how your provider would handle unexpected complications. So, for example, how do you monitor for signs of uterine rupture, and what steps would you take if concerns arise? And then, can you explain how quickly an emergency C-section can be performed at this hospital? or what factors would lead you to recommend a repeat C-section during labor. So really understanding how your provider handles emergencies can give you a peace of mind and help you feel prepared for any scenario. The last, and I think is one of the most important, is how can we work together to support my VBAC goals? So this question really opens the door to a collaborative relationship with your provider. So one that's not combative, one that's not me versus you. And this can ensure that your voice is heard and respected throughout your VBAC preparation and birth. So some other open-ended questions you can ask in relation to this would be, how do you feel about doula support? Or how do you feel about doula support for VBAC specifically? Another one could be, how do you involve your patients in the decision-making process during pregnancy and labor? And then another one is, can you review my birth plan with me and we can discuss any potential concerns you may have? So a provider who values your input and truly understands that you are the final decision maker can make a significant difference in how supported you feel throughout this process. Now, all of these questions are so important in determining, one, is your provider supportive? Two, if they're not supportive, are you going to change providers? And three, if they're not supportive and you're going to stay with them, what do you need to do to best advocate for what you're wanting? Now, again, I highly recommend interviewing several providers until you find one that you are truly comfortable with and that supports your wishes. And I know in some locations, finding a good provider and a supportive provider can be really, really hard. Or you can find a supportive provider, but you may be needing, they may practice and deliver at an unsupportive overall hospital. So a lot of logistics and planning can go into this, but I highly recommend starting this process before you're even pregnant. You can start interviewing providers to find someone who is supportive. That way, you know, when you get pregnant, you know who to go to. So, when I was preparing for my VBAC, I interviewed several different providers, including OBGYNs, hospital midwives, and home birth midwives. And I made sure to ask questions based on the type of pregnancy and birth experience I wanted to have, not just what was recommended to me. So asking the more detailed and open-ended questions really helped me decide which provider was going to best support me. And I actually ended up staying with the same OBGYN who performed my C-section. You may hear a lot of people on social media say that this is a bad idea, but for me, it was in perfect alignment after I went through all of these questions. So I hope that going over these questions was helpful for you in determining what you need to discuss with providers when you're interviewing them. And if you have any specific questions for me on how to go about this process or how to find certain providers to interview, please just message me over on Instagram and I will respond to you as soon as possible. And until next time, keep flowing. You just finished another episode of Motherhood Flow. For more, head over to thehannahgill.com or on Instagram @thehannahgill. As a reminder, this podcast is provided to you for educational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered a substitute for medical advice. Until next time, keep flowing.